Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. On today's edition, we're going to be speaking with Laredo City Councilwoman Melissa Cigarroa about some of the issues their city is facing when it comes to new border walls, some recent actions taken by the city council there, as well as get the latest on the water shortage situation on that slice of the border, if we have time for that one. South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez will be leading that discussion, so stay tuned for that. But first, let's take a look at what's trending across the border, starting with some developing news. An Atlanta-based appeals court has rejected a no-bond policy implemented by the Trump administration for people in immigration proceedings. Just a short while ago, the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals issued the 2-1 ruling. The decision deepens a divide among federal appeals courts on whether people can be kept in detention while their cases are pending. The Second Circuit reached a similar conclusion in April, while the 8th and 5th Circuits upheld the policy and the 7th Circuit deadlocked. The policy denies bond hearings to people in immigration detention, including those with no criminal history. The latest ruling states the government cannot detain every unadmitted alien without bond. Coming on down here to the Rio Grande Valley, major changes are coming to one of the largest international bridges in South Texas. On Wednesday, federal officials broke ground on a modernization project aimed at boosting security and improving cross-border flow at the Gateway International Bridge in downtown Brownsville. Construction on a $300 million project is expected to begin soon and could take up to 3 years to complete. The bridge is a century old, and officials say long wait times have been a constant problem. The project will demolish and rebuild the current port of entry, expand lanes, and improve security operations. Local officials say the improvements will make crossings faster and more efficient.
I know people get frustrated with the lines, and I think this will go a long way to alleviate the issues that we're currently experiencing. The next step is staffing, and I think that's currently being addressed. And so I think when this project's finished in 2028, we will have the most modern port of entry, and it'll be, I think, a great experience for both sides of the river.
Everybody has to understand and appreciate that. We hope that whatever delays there are, they're short, they're not long, and that they don't last for an extended period of time. But obviously, with construction taking 3 years, there's going to be a little bit of trouble and a little bit of pain.
Customs and Border Protection officials add the port will become one of the most modern along the U.S.-Mexico border. As you heard, the project is expected to be completed in 2029. A Texas translator arrested by federal agents has been released from ICE custody. Meenu Batra is the only licensed Punjabi, Hindi, and Urdu court interpreter. She works in Brownsville, Texas, and travels the country to interpret cases. She was flying out of an airport in Harlingen, Texas, when she was detained on March 17th. Since then, she's been held for 45 days at an immigration facility here in the Rio Grande Valley.
What was the hardest part of being in there?
I think uncertainty. When that door locks, you become small. You start to believe that perhaps you are not equal, that you are not human.
Batra was born in India and fled to the United States as a teenager after her parents were killed over their Sikh religion. She applied for asylum and was ultimately granted withholding of removal status, but that status did not allow her to apply for citizenship. Last week, a federal judge ordered her released, writing she was detained for no discernible reason. While the number of migrants crossing the southern border has dropped tremendously since President Trump returned to office, there is one area that is now seeing an increase. As News Nation's Allie Bradley tells us, hundreds of Border Patrol agents are headed to Laredo, Texas, to help with detentions.
Yeah, we're seeing an uptick in illegal crossings in the Laredo sector, and Border Patrol is responding in a big way, sending about 200 Border Patrol agents from both the northern and southern borders for a 30-day deployment. So sources say that the station is lacking in manpower and seeing an uptick in foot traffic. The surge is showing up on the ground and in the data. 2,600 encounters in March and April. That's up more than 50% from the previous 2 months. And we just got a statement from CBP saying, quote, CBP sent additional personnel to Laredo to continue to secure our border. That sector is bordered covered entirely by river with no natural barriers to slow illegal crossings, which makes it a target when smuggling routes shift and evolve. Thanks to record low crossings, we have the manpower and flexibility to move agents quickly, concentrate resources, and take enforcement action where it matters most. This, as a sector, is inevitably dealing with gotaways, as you can't just walk in anymore. Sources telling us that across the border, Border Patrol is averaging around 48 gotaways each day. Those are people who have been seen on camera or detected but never actually caught. The previous Border Patrol chief saying bad actors exploit the holes in the border and could have nefarious intentions.
For any of us that have done this for a living, one is too many. We don't want to see any gotaways because all it takes is one bad actor to cause harm to somebody in our communities or to our country. Lots of concern with not knowing who comes into our country and who they are, what they're bringing, what their purpose is. The gotaways have always been a concern, the primary concern, I would say, for not just the Border Patrol, but DHS writ large.
And when agents are finding them, the illegal immigrants are being hidden in shocking ways and in high temperatures. From this 13-year-old locked inside a compartment of a semi-truck to 22 people, including 2 unaccompanied minors, stuffed inside the sleeper cab of the truck, to 17 illegal immigrants found hiding in a stash house waiting for their next move. Now, our sources confirm that this deployment does include members of their special operations team, which does include BORTAC. Of course, that's basically the SWAT arm of the Border Patrol. Allie Bradley in Laredo, News Nation.
And staying on the topic of Laredo, switching gears a little bit, it's time to bring in our South Texas correspondent now, Sandra Sanchez, and our guest for today's program, Laredo City Councilwoman Melissa Cigarroa. Thanks so much for joining us today, ma'am.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Melissa, for years, Laredo has been one of the only cities in South Texas to not have border barrier built there. But this Trump administration is adamant that they are going to build wall there. They want to put 15 miles downtown in Laredo through that very popular park, Tres Laredos, I believe it's called, yes. And as well as border buoys on the river there. The city council had put it on the agenda in April, postponed it. And then I understand that CBP sent a letter to the mayor saying, if you don't take this up, if it's not decided, we're going to refer it to the Justice Department to start condemnation process. On Monday, the Laredo City Council did vote to approve limited right of entry for border wall study. So can you explain what you all agreed to, and do you think you all capitulated after years of fighting this?
Well, I would say that it's important to understand that the previous 2 meetings where the item was tabled was because we had not received any other type of right of entry. The first proposal that was requested was a right of entry -C, which meant that Border Patrol and their contractors could enter into city property, public lands, and begin the surveying and the construction process all at the same time. On the advice of our attorneys, they suggested that we ask for a more limited right of entry, which we did. And then the later 2 meetings, these previous 2 meetings, we didn't receive any response from the federal government. So we weren't necessarily rejecting any right of entry offer. We just had not received something that we could consider. So this last meeting, before we received the letter from Commissioner Scott, suggesting that perhaps condemnation proceedings would occur if we didn't take up the right of entry, we did receive a more limited right of entry, and we approved that measure. Now, that right of entry would allow for the surveying of the city parcels. You know, the city of Laredo owns 1,000 acres along the riverside, but we are not the only property owners. There are also private property owners. So I understand that these boundary surveys need to be taken so that Border Patrol or CBP understands the limits of those properties, and that will be the first step in their surveying as they prepare for this wall.
So the surveys will allow for the federal border agents to go onto the land, and will city officials accompany them and also be able to take notes and get access to the data? Yes. I mean, this is admittedly
a restricted right of entry, right? So it's only looking at the parcel boundaries. It is the first step. What we are looking for from CBP, and I understand that they have released some hydrologic data, we would like more information about the impacts of the border wall being placed right along the floodplain. And we know that this border wall infrastructure, which can be anywhere from 150 feet to 250 feet for the wall and the two roads on either side, we would like to understand the flooding impacts. We know it will be at the very limit of the floodplain because our city is built up to that same limit of the floodplain. We're an old city. We've existed for hundreds of years. So naturally, our citizens have built and our businesses have built right up alongside what is possible for maximizing the use of the land along the river.
Now, under this agreement, and has the federal government agreed to it, will you get advance notice of these surveys so that you can be part of it?
We believe so, yes, and all in good faith. I mean, I think the city has been acting in good faith. We live in a very special part of the middle reach of the Rio Grande, and because of our geography and the flooding that we have seen most recently in 2010, and then also in 1998, there was also a huge flood. And of course, there's a storied past in the 1950s when the flooding reached into the interior of our city. Flooding is a serious concern because we have over 20 riverside neighborhoods. And if flooding impacts are felt, then we do fear that there could be the loss of life and the loss of property.
We're speaking with Laredo City Councilwoman Melissa Cigarroa about the border wall needs of the federal government and what the city is doing to mitigate things on behalf of their residents. So stay with us. We're going to take a quick break and continue the conversation on the other side. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live, bringing back in our guest for today's program, Laredo City Councilwoman Miss Melissa Cigarroa.
Melissa, the federal government wants to build 56 miles of waterborne barrier, the buoys, through the Laredo sector. You mentioned a study. There was a study that the Center for the Rio Grande International Study Center in March released. It showed there would cause significant erosion and intensify flooding. You mentioned some of that before the break. So what are the fears of the buoys there if they are put in Laredo? And having given this limited right of entry, how can you prevent the buoys from going into the river, or are you trying?
We actually understand that we have no right to question or fight against the placement of the buoys. It is a huge concern. So we know that in Eagle Pass they've had buoys, and sedimentation has been a tremendous problem. And sedimentation does a couple of things. It impacts the water quality, and it also creates a shallower river, which then causes more evaporation. And ironically, it's easier to cross when you have a shallower riverbed. So the Rio Grande in our part where we live is the only source of our drinking water. These buoys, even the wall infrastructure, it's a huge concern because our entire city and the city of Nuevo Laredo and then other cities who live along the border in our middle reach of the river depend 100% on the Rio Grande. And we feel like the federal government has not taken that into consideration, or at the least, we haven't seen those studies. So the study that you referenced from the Rio Grande International Study Center was done by Dr. Mark Tompkins, who's a fluvial geomorphologist. He's spent almost 30 years studying rivers and river systems. He described tremendous impacts that would cause risk of loss of life and risk to property. But we also are concerned with the risk to our only source of drinking water. You know, the buoys are also, the sedimentation causes problems with creating different river flows. And we know by treaty obligation that the United States cannot interfere with where the international boundary is. And that means that those flows have to remain constant. All of these things worry us as a city.
So you began your answer with saying you really have no right to question it. Are you saying that you cannot push back against the river buoys because they're under the purview of the International Boundary and Water Commission, because they're in the international river?
That is exactly what we have been told by our attorneys. It's international waters, and we cannot concern ourselves with those waters. We can only concern ourselves with city property.
Okay.
So, and they're already installing them. We've got reports that from Columbia Bridge, which is the third busiest bridge in the country, and probably the farthest reach of city limits, that the buoy installation is beginning.
So the buoy installation has started there. When did it start there in Laredo?
I believe yesterday. I mean,
wow.
Those are the reports that I've gotten. Yes.
Breaking news here, yeah.
And we haven't seen any studies about what their impacts are going to be on the river flow.
They started putting them here in Brownsville. They intend to put 250 miles of buoys all the way toward the Big Bend region. So I also saw on the city agenda that the city manager wanted to conduct a hydraulic study. Is that still on the table, or are you giving that up since you can't really question the buoys?
No, absolutely no. Because this smart wall infrastructure includes the buoys and includes the wall infrastructure, right? And no matter what the federal government is doing, we have to understand what those impacts are going to be to the people that live by the river and to our only source of drinking water. So we need to carry out these studies. It's a hydraulic, hydrologic, and geomorphologic, I think, study to understand, right, what the impacts of this hard infrastructure will be to our interests, to our citizens, to the people who live here. That's our obligation.
And for context, we've talked many times on this show about the water that Mexico owes the United States that's paid through the Rio Grande, 1.75 million acres feet of water due in 5-year cycles. They paid only about half of it this past 5-year cycle that ended in October. Laredo had actually implemented strict water restrictions for your residents there to conserve water. What are the restrictions now? Are you still having them adhere to those?
Well, I think the conservation about how many times you can water your lawn and just trying to be more aware of wasting of water, no car washing, things like that, or I think it's maybe one day a week. But all of that conservation is part of the bigger plan for water security, right? It's just something that we need to do as we concern ourselves with protecting our only source of drinking water.
Going back to that study that the council wants to commission on the river and the impacts of those buoys, is there any concern that the city might have to shell out out of their own budget to mitigate any problems that do arise from those buoys?
Well, I believe so, yes. I have no doubt that, unfortunately, it'll be the city that has to pick up the pieces when we understand the damage that's caused by the buoys in the river. I think the study, though, will give us some information so we can plan. So, yes, we're concerned of the loss of property, and we are very concerned about the water quality, but we are also concerned about protecting our citizens. And if we can't understand what the impacts will be, how does this city plan for emergencies? We will get a flood. We will get a big flood. And the velocity that is created because of the intensification of the water height, it all plays a part in creating riskier conditions, especially for the people that live along the riverside. We know flooding occurs in the middle of the night. So this city has to be prepared to mitigate loss of life above all else.
As a follow-up to Rudy's question, was there a dollar figure placed on that study for how much the city was willing to pay to understand this better?
I would say that we need to pay what it's going to cost. I have heard everything from tens of thousands of dollars to $500,000, but the latest engineer that I spoke with said around 200,000, 250 maybe. And I think that, yes, it's a big number, but as a city, it is our obligation to keep our citizens safe. It's a matter of public safety.
Going back to the border wall, there were reports that CBP might be altering the type of wall put there. It may be a lower wall. There was some renderings in the Texas Tribune with slats through the middle. You could actually see the river. You could see the other side. You could see Nuevo Laredo. Have you received those schematics, and is that what they're planning to do, or do you know?
So the alternative wall designs that we've seen were for our sensitive areas, not what you're showing on screen right now. They were much calmer. Sort of ornamental almost. And those were provided by the subcontractors who actually hold the contract. So even though currently the administration has zero land, once they proceed through condemnation, then these contractors will do a design build. They have a design build contract. So the conversation was with the contractors. The designs presented were by those contractors. We have not had confirmation from CBP that these would be acceptable alternative designs, but we are willing to work with them. We are at the table. Some of the proposals have a sort of a berm right along the river. And again, we understand from living here from IBWC that raising the height of our side of the river would put in Nuevo Laredo, for example, in danger because they sit so much lower than we do. You know, in Laredo, the river runs north-south until our downtown and then takes a sharp, almost right-hand turn and runs west to east. So just gravity and physics, that water could easily be pushed into Nuevo Laredo, which would be a treaty violation and put other people's lives in danger.
And you and I have walked that section of river many times together near Zacatecas Creek, and I exactly know what you're talking about. The topography there is hard to understand, but it's exactly what you were describing. So the contractors, Fisher Sand and Gravel, and as well as SLSCO, they've already been issued. Fisher Sand and Gravel got a $740 million contract. The other got a $665 million contract. But you're saying it could be an alternative type of border wall, and that's what the subcontractors are releasing these designs to you all. Because when I asked DHS, they said they have not released any other designs. So that would explain why we haven't gotten the other ones.
Exactly. It's not an official acceptance yet. These are just ideas that are being exchanged, and we fervently hope that they will accept these alternative designs.
We've been speaking with Laredo City Councilwoman Melissa Cigarroa about what the city is doing to try to mitigate the potential border wall construction coming to their piece of the Rio Grande. Unfortunately, we're out of time today, ma'am, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on.
All right. Border Report Live will be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. A few more headlines today. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met Pope Leo at the Vatican this morning. His visit was expected to be a fence-mending mission after weeks of tensions over the war in Iran, in which U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly bashed Pope Leo over his promotion of peace in the region. The pontiff has said he is only preaching the gospel and promoting peace. Rubio, who's a practicing Catholic, held an audience with Pope Leo on Thursday, which was complicated at the last minute by Trump's latest criticism of the Chicago-born pontiff. Leo has pushed back, calling out Trump's misrepresentations of his views on Iran and nuclear weapons. Pope Leo will celebrate his first year as pontiff on Friday. This week, the Connecticut governor, Ned Lamont, signed a bill Democrats say will protect people from federal immigration enforcement. It allows residents to sue federal agents if they believe their civil rights have been violated. It also bans federal agents from making arrests at schools, hospitals, and places of worship without a warrant. Republicans argue the law is unenforceable, but Connecticut's Attorney General says that he is prepared to defend the bill's validity in a courtroom. And that is going to do it for us today. For Sandra Sanchez right here in South Texas, my name is Rudy Mireles. Thank you so much for watching.